Alright guys, welcome back. I wanted to go ahead and make this video since I was kind of skipping over it in some of my other videos, or some of my other footage that I filmed while I was putting this car together. Before we start, so this is going to be the wiring how-to on the NB Miata, and I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. And if anybody has any questions, just let me know or send me a message or something. But so before we start, where this is at right now, I got it running. I fixed a whole bunch of stuff on it. I put the exhaust, hooked the exhaust up. I ended up taking it to an autocross, which was really fun. Didn't do great because I mean, it was my first autocross, and there's also, these tires are ancient and the front alignment is completely trashed. I just haven't had a chance to take it and get it aligned. But where it's at right now, I got an aftermarket ECU for it. I got one of the AEM ECUs, and I think either something's messed up with one of the sensors, or I think I need to recalibrate the O2 sensor. It's hitting some kind of weird rev limiter, but it's parked right now. There's a lot of things it needs. Having driven it for hundreds of miles, if not 1,000 miles probably by this point, there's a lot of things it needs. As you can tell, the power steering line that I chose doesn't work for power steering fluid. It is sweating, so that's something I need to address. And a lot of the coolant lines that I hooked up that were mismatched sizes are starting to leak, so I really need to drain all the coolant and go through and redo everything with a little bit better execution as far as the sizes of lines and the types of clamps that I use. And with it being pretty much a track rat summer toy, I'm not too worried about it. I'm just happy that I was able to get it together and get it running. But what I want to show you guys today is the wiring. And so what that's going to entail is I'm going to crawl under the dash. I'm going to show you the large blue connector that you'll need to remove from your factory Miata engine harness. And then I'm going to show you the connections to the flying lead from the Minitec kit, and I'm going to show you all data. So I paid for all data again just to make this video because they only give you a month, and I've already paid for it twice, but it took me a lot longer than a month to do this. So there's going to be a bunch of different things that I use to show you guys. So this, let's just go through it one by one, and hopefully I can cover everything. So this is what you get with the Minitec kit, and there was some stuff that was kind of confusing in here to me as far as the wording goes, but it's all basic. And then what I've got on my phone right here is a list of stuff that I came up with when I was going through this. I never went back and edited this. This is a screenshot of what I came up with. But I basically listed every pin, and then once I was done, this list basically matches the list Minitec goes, but I've got the pinouts of where they need to go and what colors for a lot of them, or at least what place they go in. And then I added the extra things I needed for the sensors, check engine light, whatever. Sorry, it's cold out here. So let's start with pin A. So pin A, let's look at this connector. So the connector from the flying lead, they give you a white connector, and it is buried in here the way I've got it wired. But so this side of this connector is wired when you get your Minitec harness. So the other side of the connector is what you have to pin out. And on one side it shows A through E, or A through F? No, A through E. So A is on this side, and if you look at this connector, it says it on there. I know I'm not getting a good shot of it, but looking at it right now, looks like I wired A with a blue with a white line wire going into it. B has a red wire that I ran. C didn't have anything in it. D has a brown with red line. And then E is red with white. And then flipping to the other side of the connector, we've got F, G, H, J, and I guess K. Yeah, F, G, H, J, K. So I've got nothing in the first one. The second one is a green with orange, I believe. And then the only other one I've got on this side of the connector is the last one, which is another power wire that I ran. One of these is supposed to be in here. It's actually, I don't remember which one I pulled it out of, but in this side of the connector, it is a blue with yellow line. So whatever blue with yellow line was, that's going to another wire that I ran, which it looks like I ran it in blue. I believe that is the start stop or the start switch signal. The problem was I lost my pin to plug into this side to crimp on, and I couldn't find my pins until after I was done with the project. So that's why this one is separate. But that's the start switch signal. So let's go look at the list. So pin A is your switched ground for your cooling fan relay, and it says Honda pin A20. So what I had for pin A was cooling fan relay, connect Mazda 2B to Honda pin A. So then I've also got 2C is condenser fan. Wire this in with 2B for both fans to run. So let's talk about that real quick. So you've got two fans, and that means there's going to be two different relays, one for each fan. And from my experience building this, there's one relay that's under the dash and there's one relay that's right here. And the way I wired it, since I don't have AC on this car, I want both of the fans to run when the ECU triggers them to turn on at whatever temperature that it's reading. When it says I want to cool down, I want both fans to cool it down. So because of the age of these cars, from what I can tell online, everybody has an issue with this, and this is a good example of it because there's two relays out here, right here. These two relays, one of them is for your AC, and one of them is for the condenser, or for the fan that they call condenser fan or whatever. The other fan that kicks on when your AC kicks on. So both of these relays, if you look, were completely corroded and just garbage. And on this one, the one for the cooling fan side of it, the wires just broke off of there. They were all completely corroded. This one that this is just for the AC, and it's not hooked up, so yeah, that's why I just left it in here. But all of the water gets into these and it corrodes them, and then they break right there at the pins. So that's why I replaced it, and it's probably a good idea to replace it with a cheapo Amazon relay. And if you don't know how a relay works, there are instructions for how to wire them when you buy relays. They're super cheap on Amazon. And when I did it, I accidentally ordered like a ton of them. I got like 10 relays thinking that I was getting like 2. So I've got a bunch of extras. But if you buy one of these Amazon relays, you can just They're color coded. They've got instructions, but you can wire them just like mine because mine worked. I didn't screw up the wiring. It worked right the first time. So when you come in here, one of these two relays is going to have these colors. And the way you're going to wire it, so when you find the relay that's got the black and red, the green and black, the white and blue, and the black and white, that's the one you're going to need for your second fan. The one that's got the black and yellow and the pink, that's for your AC. I'm not going to explain that because I didn't hook up AC, and I assume most people aren't running AC on these cars. But with this relay, if you want to wire it just like mine, the blue wire from the relay goes to the green and black. The white wire from the relay goes to the white with blue. The red wire goes to the black with red. And the black wire goes to the black and white. So I wired that in. And when you wired in the car, so that right there was just to replace that relay. That's all I did on that one. On the other end, I've got pin A, cooling fan relay, connect to Mazda 2B. So that's the regular cooling fan. Then the condenser fan, which is the other fan, is to C. So I wired those two together from the engine harness. So so this is a schematic of the powertrain harness. So let me show you how I get to this, because I know a lot of people are going to want to buy this from ALLDATA. You can sign up for a month for just this specific vehicle. So you pick the Mazda that matches your year. This is for an NB. Once you get it, it shows you this. You go to diagrams, you go to electrical, interactive OE, or interactive color, non-OE. They've also got the OEM diagrams in here too, which I did use a lot to figure this out. But you go to the non-OE, you go down to powertrain management, engine controls, and that brings you up with this. You click any of these pictures and it opens up this, which is 3 different panels, and you can zoom in with the plus buttons. So these are all the connections for your engine harness, powertrain control harness. So when it says like 2A, that's going to be the connector that goes to the ECU in position 2. So the connector, obviously it starts with position 2, which is, they don't have like a 1. So over here it's position 4. So these are just the white connectors on the engine harness. Let me see if I can pull this out. So this was my old harness. There were a bunch of connectors in there, like this. This would have been one of our ECU connectors. So you find the one that's in the first position, it'll be position 2. I think there was only 3 ECU connectors, so it'd be like position 2, position 3, and then position 4. But looking at that harness, so if the smart way to do it is to trace it starting at where it actually plugs into the connector. So we're doing the 2 cooling fan relays. So if you look right here, position 2B and position 2C go to the cooling fan system coming out of this right here. This whole thing is the connector that connects to the ECU. So there's a blue with white and there's a red with yellow and then a blue with white. So 2B and 2C. So I tied those 2 wires together. The only thing is, the confusing part about all of this is that you need to grab your engine harness, find these wires and trace them back to the big blue connector within the engine harness. And I'm going to crawl under the dashboard and show you guys what that looks like the best I can, because it's way up under there and it's a tiny car. But so those two wires get tied together and run, it'll go through the body harness into that blue connector, and then from that blue connector you're going to tie them together and you're going to run those to pin A right here. So when we look at pin A on this first pin right here, I've got two wires going into pin A. It's a red with yellow and a blue with white. So that's pin A, that's for our cooling fans. So I know that's confusing, but we're working through it. Pin B, supply this wire with constant power for your engine computer. Use 7.5 amp fuse. So that can go to anywhere in your factory fuse box that gets, what is it, constant power. So 12 volts all the time while the battery's hooked up. And what I want to point out about that one is that that's what kept this car from starting from the beginning. We fought this issue until we finally figured out that the fuse that it was on wasn't the right one. So if you've got your, so I did all these things with fuse taps, which allows you to retain whatever fuse you're tapping off of and then add your own circuit. They're very handy. They're the mini fuse taps, they're not regular size. I've got a total of 3 right now. I believe one of those might be running my O2 sensor. You're going to tap off of here from a source that is constant 12 volts all the time for pin B, and that's going to be the power for your ECU. So grab a multimeter, see what has 12 volts all the time in there, and then that's what you can use as your pin B power supply for your ECU. Make sure that that power supply doesn't turn off when you crank the engine, because that's the problem that we had, is while I was trying to crank the engine, it was turning off the power to the ECU. So pin C, we've got this as the ground for the oil pressure light. So for the oil pressure light, it was actually very, very simple. So I've got 2 oil pressure sensors on this engine. Right there, you can see that there are 2 sensors in a T. So I got a 1/8 inch MPT T, and the thread pitch between the 2 different sensors, the one on the Honda and the one that I saved from the Mazda engine, one's 1/8 by 27 and one's 1/8 by 28. So you can, as long as you thread tape the crap out of them, you can run them both into a regular 1/8 inch MPT T and then run them into the oil gallery. So the one you see here on the bottom, that black wire and that connector, all I had to do was extend it from the factory harness where it was way down there. So wherever your oil pressure wire from your body, coming out of your body harness, goes to the Miata engine, you just extend it. I even reused that same, you see that white connector there? I reused that same connector and just extended it by about 1 foot, plugged it into the sensor, and it works. So all that makes it really simple. And once you hook that up, if you're using, and if you do it this way, you use both sensors, because the other sensor is going to hook in straight into the Minitec harness, then you'll be able to retain your factory Mazda oil pressure gauge, which is super nice to have, especially that first time you start it, because all it is a switch and the wire's already there. So since you it's already going through everything. It has nothing to do with the Mazda engine harness. All you got to do is extend it and plug it in. So I had extend wire for gauge, so that's all we had to do for pin C. So we don't have to hook any pins up on pin C. On this first side, pin C is vacant. So you got A, which is your 2 wires for your cooling fans, B, which is power for your ECU constant, and then pin C was empty. Pin D in here is brown with a red line. Pin D says this is the ground for your alternator light. So what I had for notes was pin D, alternator light, brown/red connector, 3B in cluster, 3U in the Mazda ECU. And this is your alternator light. It's brown with a red line. So you're gonna find 3U, which is connector 3, position U, and it is brown with a red line. So that's 3U from the connector going to the Mazda ECU. So you're going to trace that back all the way back through the harness to the big blue connector that I haven't showed you guys yet. And that ends up going to your instrument cluster. So since it goes through the blue connector into your instrument cluster, you can pretty much take it out of this connector right here, and this is going to pin D on the flying lead for the Minitec harness, and that will power your alternator light in your cluster. That way you know if your alternator is not working or is working, whatever. All right, so pin E, this one's super important. Fuel pump control. It goes to the ground side of the fuel pump relay, Honda pin A15. So pin E, fuel pump control, is a red and white in position 2M. So if you go to connector 2M, red and white. So connector 2, position M on the Mazda ECU's ECU connector, it's red and white, and it goes, you trace it back to the big blue connector, and that's what's going to drive your fuel pump control, which is very important because the ECU controls the fuel pump. What I would do, or what I ended up doing, was I took it out of this connector, or cut it right there at the connector, and then I ran that wire to pin E. Yep, so pin E is red and white, this last one on the end right here. So that's that one side of the connector, and we're going to the other side. And on this side I only have 2 things. So we're going to start with position G. Well, let's look at what E is while we're over there. But position G is going to be green with a orange line. Before we go to G, so G, the one that was a green with an orange line, that one is your tachometer signal. If you wire it in straight, which is what I did to begin with, it will work. It won't be accurate. You need the tach adapter, which you can get from Techno Versions or whoever. There's a bunch of them online. They're like 80 bucks. It worked. It was accurate for that on the factory ECU, and then the output from the ECU, the aftermarket ECU, the AEM, isn't accurate. It's got some kind of different output. I haven't figured it out. It kind of jumps around when I'm driving. I don't care right now. So, but it worked great. The tach adapter, because it's a pulse converter, it converts it from 6 into 4, which is what your ECU needs to see. And it worked good. And it's basically the little box that I've got in here with the Techno Versions tach adapter. It just needs power and ground, and then you cut the green and orange wire, and one side of that wire goes to one connection on the box, and the other side goes to the other connection. All of the instructions they come with the box. So it's basically, that's the engine speed signal, and you basically intercept that. So you cut the wire and put that wire on each side in that box, and then it just needs power and ground for the board to work. So that's pin G. But so pin E is the fuel pump control. Pin F, which is the first one on the next side of that switch, which is the one that I didn't have in the connector because I lost my pins. Pin F is the start switch signal. I ran a wire from the flying lead in position pin F to the start switch. So you're gonna have to pull this whole dashboard and everything out of here. When you pull it out of here, your start switch, your column's gonna be here. And when you go to put everything back in, so it's the two big wires that go to the start switch. I believe they're both white with like, it's either a black stripe or a blue stripe. I think it was white with blue. I don't remember which one I tapped off of, but basically what I did was I put a multimeter on that to see when it was getting signal, and I found one of the wires that goes into the actual start switch, the key switch, gets power only when you're cranking. So it only showed 12 volts when I turned to that switch. That's the wire that you need to run to pin F for your start switch signal, because the Honda ECU needs to know when you're cranking the engine. So that's pin F, start switch signal. So pin G, we already talked about, that's the tach signal. Pin G is green and orange. It was 3O going into the ECU, the Mazda ECU. So that's going to be your engine speed sensor. So tach signal, you don't need that to start the car. So if you want to take your time figuring that one out, I'm going to go ahead and skip it. We already talked about it. Pin H is for power steering. The Mazda has a power steering switch. It switches the power steering on at low speeds and it switches it off at high speeds. A lot of people like that. A lot of people really don't like that, and they convert to manual racks. I like having power steering. Even on this little light car, I really like it, and I like it more now because it doesn't have that switch. It doesn't switch off. So I paid for the stuff to hook up the power steering, and I wanted to have it, and I actually really like it because I can put one finger on the wheel and turn it. They make electric power steering for this. I want to get it someday. I'm not worried about it right now. There's also the possibility of getting I actually bought one. There's an MR2 electric power steering pump. If you get that, you can eliminate the mechanical power steering pump on this altogether. Cleans everything up. But that pump is huge. I mean, it's big. And once I got everything together and figured out what was wrong with just this power steering, then I was like, I don't even need this pump. Maybe someday I'll put it on. I don't care right now. You don't need that power steering switch for the Honda setup, because the Honda doesn't switch its power steering off. You don't need that connector at all. One thing I will note about power steering, I fought with this thing. It was cavitating and it was overflowing all over the place. The gasket where this barb goes into the pump was flat, and it was sucking air as this pump was going. So go ahead, take this off while you've got everything empty, replace the little O-ring that goes on that thing, and put it back in there. That way you're not cavitating, you're not blowing up your pump. I don't know how this pump still works, because it was cavitating so bad you could hear it. It sounded like a typical Ford power steering pump. But you don't need to use the pin H power steering if you don't have your power steering switched on and off. And the Honda power steering doesn't use it. So I've got power steering all the time now. It's great. I love it. I'm probably not going to change it anytime soon. Pin J just says open. Pin K, supply this wire with switched 12 volt on a 15 amp fuse. This is switched power. This is another one where you're going to take it into... So I ran a wire before I put the dashboard back in. Actually, I ran all of these wires before I put the dashboard back in. Make sure you run all of your wires before you put it back in, because it is a pain in the ass once it's in. So you run this wire to a switched power, which switched power only comes on with the key. Again, make sure that you find one that doesn't for the switched power, that it doesn't unswitch that power when you're cranking the engine, because that will, the problem we were having with the other one was that when I actually turned the switch to crank the engine, the ECU was losing power and it wasn't sending anything to the injectors or the coil packs, and it was screwing us up because we were like, we're not getting spark, we're not getting fuel. We could spray fuel in there and it was like dieseling, which was screwing us up even further because we were like, oh, it's getting intermittent spark. No, it was the ECU was not getting power while you were cranking. Constant 12 volt is pin A. Switched 12 volt is pin K. If you hook up just this stuff right here, the engine should start. This should be enough. Before you get into doing all of the other wiring inside the car, you need to do the wiring that's out here. As far as the important wires, and this only applies to the NB Miata body harness. The NA Miata, it's integrated. The engine harness is integrated with the body harness. I don't know how to do that. I haven't, just because I haven't done it. But you've got this big wire right here, the body harness, that runs back to the battery. And I know it's going to be very hard for you to see it, but it comes up from down there. There is a wire that goes off of it. So this wire, from that big wire, there's a branch off in the Mazda. Branches off to right here, and pretty much right here where it connects to the starter on the Mazda engine. So there are two big wires that go into one that go to the starter. You're gonna cut this wire and you're gonna crimp and solder and heat shrink everything, the Honda starter wire onto it, and you're gonna extend it down here. You want to make sure you get a nice big gauge wire, and so it runs down underneath the engine to the starter. There's also this smaller wire, which is black with a red line. That's your starter signal. So that needs to go to the connector that slides onto the Honda starter solenoid, which is also down there. So I soldered it on there, heat shrinked it, and that's those two. Now there's another wire right here. It is a white wire, and that went to the alternator on the Mazda engine. So we had to cut that off and crimp it and run a wire across over here, and I reused the connector where it goes onto the back, or the little spade that gets bolted onto the alternator itself. So this is your alternator wire. So there's just those three wires: your starter power, alternator power, and the starter signal. So, and those are very important. Make sure you get those hooked up before you ever try to do anything inside, because those are very important, and they're in a terrible spot to do. I mean, it was really rough. You're gonna want to do it with all your suspension stuff out, with the wheel off, because we had to get in through here, through the subframe, and I was up underneath trying to hold it while Billy crimped it, and we finally got it. But okay, so that's that engine wiring. So we've gone through the entire connector as far as the flying lead goes. This hole right here, that's where I ran the harness through. I used self tappers on the grommet, and it that they include with the Minitec harness. It's got a little gasket on it that shields it. So I just self tappered it through the firewall, and it fits over that pretty well. So there's the main engine harness, and then there's just one wire that I've got going through there. That one wire, and I'm running out of battery on this camera, so let me see if I can do it pretty quickly. That one wire was for the coolant temperature gauge, which took me a minute to figure out because the NB Miata coolant temperature gauge is two sensors within one. It's got an output for the Mazda ECU, and it's got an output for the Mazda gauge. You literally only need one wire to run this gauge, and I showed it wrong when I was initially recording. But the coolant temperature gauge, it's a violet and white in cluster connector 2A. So if we go back to vehicle, we go to diagrams, OE or non-OE electrical, instrument panel gauges and more, go to instrument cluster. There is a violet and white in connector 2A. So this is the connector in the instrument cluster. Violet and white in the second connector in your instrument cluster. It goes to your coolant temperature sensor. So that violet and white wire does go through the engine harness. It does go through there. You just have to try to trace it through, but I'll show you where in that blue connector that it goes. But that violet and white wire, I added it, I put it on a blue wire, I ran it through the firewall. So it goes through the big blue connector all the way up to the instrument cluster. And so from the instrument cluster, it goes back through the body harness, through the blue connector, all the way out to the wire that I ran. And I ran it out to the sensor. If you look at the sensor, it's the one on the bottom, like position C or whatever it is. Yeah. That wire is what goes all the way to your cluster. And then the only thing else you need for that sensor to work, it's got to ground through the body. So where I made this fitting and everything, the body of the actual sensor, underneath of the crush washer, I ran that wire right there and stripped it back, wrapped it around, tightened it down so that it would seal. And then I pulled it out and ran it right over here as a body ground. All it needs is to ground the sensor body through the harness, and then this position C or whatever it is has to run back, connect to the blue connector, and then it goes up to the cluster. So, and it worked, but I had to, it took me a while to figure that one out because I didn't know why it was working. I thought all three of those needed hooked up, and they don't. So I'm gonna go get another battery for this because my battery's running down, and then we'll crawl up underneath the dashboard and see if we can get a good look at that big blue connector that goes to the body harness for the car that everything runs through pretty much. One other thing I want to point out here, I didn't have it in because it fell out. So this one wire, it's for the check engine light. It is a white and blue. It's in position 2O in the cluster. So the second connector, it's the position O. That's your check engine light wire. And with that one, it goes to Honda pin A18. The Honda connectors where they go into the ECU. This ECU is upside down right now. So this is A, this is B, this is C, this is D. So A18 would be in this connector. You find position 18, and it like starts on this side as 1 and the other side is 8 or whatever. What I had this wire, it's white with blue. I had just stuffed it into the connector and it worked. The check engine light turned on when I cycled the key, and then it turned off and everything was Gucci, but it pulled out of there and I didn't feel like trying to pin it out and put it together. I really don't care right now. Someday I'll get it, but I'm not too worried about check engine lights until I can actually get the car running right, because it's gonna throw check engine lights for not having an automatic transmission or whatever. It might not throw a check engine light with this ECU now because this is a aftermarket one, but I just didn't put it in there. But that's your check engine light wire. It's white with blue. Position 2O in the Mazda harness. So all of the other wires that I had there were for the wideband O2 sensor, that you absolutely need in order to run the AEM ECU. I know that they list it as plug and play, and it is plug and play. It plugs into the factory connectors, but if you're going to go with the AEM ECU, you absolutely need to get a wideband O2 sensor. Try to get one of the ones that they list in the instructions, which are free online for the AEM ECU, the Series 2 plug and play. Okay, let's crawl under the dashboard and try to get a good look at this big blue connector. Alright, this is always a fun process. So I put my light down there. I'm just gonna try to slide in this tiny little hole under the dash. You gotta stick one arm in first. Alright. Nothing's gonna be in focus, so I apologize for that. I can barely see the screen. But underneath your dashboard, forgive this, I don't know, somebody must have replaced that relay with this one. I think that's actually the cooling fan relay, or one of these here is the main cooling fan relay. These are all my wires coming from the other side right now. So this blue one right here is the one that goes to our start switch. Up in there, right there somewhere, there's a white wire with a blue wire tapped off of it. Yeah, up in there. One of the white wires that goes to your starter, your start switch has that blue wire tapped onto it, and that's the one that only gets power when you turn the key. But right here, this is our big blue connector. I cut a whole bunch of wires. That's probably a giant fire hazard. So we've got 3 wires right here going. These 3 that come across go up to our fuse box. So I've got those going up in there to our fuse box for different fuse taps for power sources. This purple wire right here is the one that goes to the coolant temp sensor. It's a purple with a white line, and it goes right. You've got your white with a blue line right here. You've got your white with a blue line on the edge right there. That's your check engine light wire. You've got your white with a red line right here. So this is white with a red line going right there. That white with a red line was your fuel pump. You've got your green with an orange line right here. That was your tack signal. Red with a yellow line, which I don't remember what that was. And then you've got blue with a white line, which I don't remember what that was. And you've got brown with a red line. Maybe that was your fuel pump. I don't remember. But they all go into this connector. So based on what I've already gone over, you trace them back through your engine harness to this connector. You remove them from the engine harness. You keep them in this connector. Everything other than these wires. So red with white line, blue with white line, red with yellow line, purple with white line, brown with red line, and green with orange line that looks kind of yellow. That's all you need out of this connector. I cut everything else on here. And it hooks onto the side of your HVAC system up there. Then you just need your 2 wires, your switch power and your constant power, and then your 1 wire going up to your start signal switch. And that's it. That's all you need for the wiring to get everything to work. Let me see if I can try to show you guys where everything goes in the fuse box. I know a lot of people probably want to know about that. I'm just doing these one by one because I don't know what they are until I think about them. So this one right here, I had going into the AC fuse. And it was I've just got a 5 amp circuit. I believe I tapped this power for my wideband sensor, so you might not need it if you're running stock ECU, but that was going to your AC. So let me see what these other two are. I believe these two are going to be our powers. Alright, so this one I had going listed as the door locks. I believe that was our, since it was door locks, I believe it was constant power. Okay, so this one has, it was in position for the turn signals. So it was a 7.5 amp fuse. Then we added the fuse tap for this power source was a 15 amp, which I believe was our switched power, because I believe our turn signals are switched. But that's all I've got, 3 fuse taps, and this one right here was for my wideband. Yep, so looking at our sheet from Minitec, pin K, which is where we ran that last one I showed you, which was a 15 amp fuse, so that was coming off of our turn signals. And then pin A, which was our, no, not pin A, pin B, which is our constant power wire for our engine computer. That's a 7.5 amp fuse. That one I ran off of the door locks. That is all for the wiring. I know it's confusing. Another thing to remember is when you're hooking all this stuff up, your map sensor and your TPMS sensor are different colors, but they'll both plug onto the same things. So you make sure that the gray one goes to your TPMS and the black one goes to your map sensor. And I've replaced this map sensor multiple times thinking that it was a problem, and it's not. The other thing, buy yourself a new IAC valve like I did right here. You definitely want it. Even just replacing one that I was pretty sure worked, it still affected the way that the car idled. So that's it for the wiring on this one. I just want you guys to be able to see what it took to wire this thing to get it started getting running. I did paint the hood too. I tried to go for a matte color, but it turns out the matte color is pretty glossy. And I just didn't want it to look like primer anymore, so I just painted it real quick. It's cold out here now. I'm gonna go inside and finish editing you guys some videos, but thanks for watching. I really appreciate everybody that's watched through this this whole build process. I appreciate everybody who's sent me questions or sent me suggestions. We've got a Facebook page where I usually post the videos after I've posted them to YouTube. Coming up next on the channel in the spring, we've got what this wheel is going on. I'm going to start working on that car. We still need to fix up Billy's old truck. Billy's working on a whole bunch of videos with projects he's got going on, but thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you later.